My parents agreed to watch my daughter while I attended a friend's wedding. When I returned, I found her crying while washing dishes. My mother laughed. She's a bad girl, so she's working as a maid. My sister smirked while her children played video games. I said nothing, picked up my daughter and walked out. In the small town of Oak Ridge in Westchester County, Carol Wilson worked as a pharmacist whom the locals relied upon. With her gentle smile and reliable knowledge in her white pharmacy coat, Carol was an essential presence supporting the health of the townspeople. Carol had divorced Michael 5 years ago and now lived with her daughter Emily, who had turned 10. "Mom, what's for dinner tonight?" Emily asked as she returned from school and picked up an apple from the kitchen counter. "Well, how about chicken pot pie?" "Your favorite," Carol answered as she took ingredients out of the refrigerator. Emily was a quiet, reserved girl with brown eyes just like her mother's golden-tinged hair inherited from her father. She preferred expressing herself through music rather than words, and when she played the piano, her expression came alive as if she were a different person. Carol took pride in her daughter's talent. "I can play Chopin's Prelude for tomorrow's piano lesson," Emily said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Really? That's wonderful. Would you play it for me?" "Before dinner is ready." Emily nodded and headed toward the piano in the living room. This should have been a happy everyday scene at home. However, a shadow always lingered in a corner of Carol's heart. It was her relationship with her family. Carol's parents, Martha and George, once ran a well-regarded Italian restaurant called Collins in Oak Ridge, but they had now retired and were living a comfortable life in a house with a spacious yard on the outskirts of town. Carol also had a younger sister, Diane, who worked at a local real estate company. Diane had energetic twin boys, Jason and Joshua. Though only 8 years old, they were children often talked about for their liveliness and intelligence. "Emily, are we going to Grandma and Grandpa's house this weekend?" Emily asked one day. Carol couldn't hide her startled expression. "Why? Do you want to go?" "Not really, but Jason and Joshua were saying at school that they got a new game console." Carol and Diane's relationship had been complicated since childhood. Her parents had always favored Diane and treated her specially. While Carol was made to help with household chores as the responsible eldest daughter, Diane was raised being pampered as the cute second daughter. When Carol mentioned the unfairness, her parents would invariably admonish her with "because you're the eldest," and eventually, she came to accept it and give up. Even after becoming adults, that relationship hadn't changed. At family gatherings, Carol's topics were passed over briefly, and instead, the conversation would typically become lively with boastful stories about Diane's children. Still, Carol tried to maintain a relationship with her family. She wanted to give Emily the presence of good grandparents. Amid all this, an invitation arrived for Carol last week. It was for her college friend Jennifer's wedding. Carol smiled quietly. Jennifer was one of the few friends who had continued to support her even after her divorce. She wanted to sincerely congratulate her friend, who had finally found happiness she once thought was beyond reach. "Emily, what would you like to do while Mom goes to the wedding?" "Should we have someone come over? Or how about staying at Grandma and Grandpa's house?" Emily suggested. Carol hesitated for a moment. She felt something was off about leaving her daughter at her parents' house. However, seeing Emily's expectant expression, she couldn't find a reason to refuse. When she picked up the phone and called her mother Martha, she happily agreed to take Emily. "Of course, Carol. We'd love to see our granddaughter after so long. Emily can play the piano too, so we're looking forward to it." "Honey, are you sure about this?" Carol asked Emily with a worried look after hanging up the phone. Emily smiled calmly. "It's fine. I'm looking forward to playing the piano with Grandma. Well, then I'll ask them. I'll come pick you up tomorrow evening." Carol stroked Emily's head and began preparing for the next day. On the morning of the wedding, Carol was getting dressed up thoroughly for the first time in a long while. She chose a wine red silk dress, put her hair up, and applied makeup carefully though modestly. Though she usually wore a ponytail and simple clothes, today was special. "Mom, you look so pretty." Emily's eyes sparkled seeing Carol in her dress. "Thank you, Emily." Carol smiled happily. "Be a good girl at Grandma's house today. You can practice the piano too, so I'm sure you'll have fun." "Yes. I'll practice the piano properly." Emily was packing her favorite books and piano music into a small backpack. Carol drove to her parents' house. The spacious home with a large yard in the suburbs had always been a place that stirred mixed feelings in Carol. A place where nostalgia and discomfort mingled. "Carol, Emily, welcome." Martha greeted them with a broad smile as she opened the door. She hugged Emily and said, "Grandma has been looking forward to this." George was visible behind Martha. "Hello, Carol. You look beautiful in that outfit," he awkwardly complimented. "Thank you, Dad," Carol replied as she placed Emily's bag on the floor. "I've put Emily's medicine in her bag. She hardly ever has asthma attacks, but just in case. And don't forget about her allergies." "Of course, don't worry. We can certainly take care of our granddaughter," George said, sounding a bit offended. Carol quickly smiled. "Of course. Well then, Emily, she turned to her daughter. Mom will come pick you up in the evening, so be a good girl. I understand, Emily nodded quietly. Well, have a good time. Enjoy the young people's wedding, Martha said. Diane will be bringing her children over later, so Emily won't be bored. Carol hesitated for a moment but then looked at her watch and hurried to leave. Please take care of her. When she arrived at the wedding venue, it was already overflowing with flowers and smiles. Carol decided to enjoy her time as a woman, switching her mind away from work and child-rearing. Carol, it's been so long. Jennifer's cheerful voice rang out. Dressed in pure white, she was the very symbol of happiness. Jenny, congratulations. What a lovely ceremony. Carol hugged her friend. I'm so glad you came. Where's Emily? I left her with my parents. I thought I'd enjoy some time to myself for a change. That's right. Don't just think about your child all the time. Think about yourself sometimes too, Jennifer said with a laugh. Look, there's John over there. He's single, you know. Carol laughed embarrassedly. Oh, Jenny. The ceremony was beautiful and moving, watching the bride and groom exchange vows. Carol remembered her own marriage. But today, she was determined to focus on celebrating this happy moment rather than dwelling on sad memories. When the party began, Carol enjoyed dancing on the dance floor and chatting with old friends. Midway through, she received a message from her mother saying, Emily is just being a bit disobedient. But Carol didn't worry much about it. She figured it was probably about eating too many snacks or TV time. Carol, are you worried about Emily? Lisa, a college friend sitting next to her, asked. A little. My mother messaged saying she's not listening. Don't just think about your child. Think about yourself sometimes too. Lisa said the same thing. I can't remember the last time I saw you in such a beautiful dress. Carol smiled, but in her heart, she had begun to watch the clock. The ceremony ended earlier than planned, and Carol, concerned about the message from her mother, decided to head to her parents' house. As she drove, she felt an inexplicable uneasiness in her chest. When she arrived at her parents' house, the door was open, but no one came to greet her. From the living room, she could hear the sound of a video game and children laughing. When Carol entered, she saw Diane's twin boys sitting on the sofa, absorbed in the latest video game. Hello, Jason, Joshua, Carol called out, but the two continued playing, engrossed in their game. Hearing water sounds from the kitchen, Carol headed in that direction. What she saw was Emily crying while washing dishes at the kitchen sink. A mountain of dishes was piled in front of Emily. Beside her, Martha was drinking coffee and chatting happily with Diane. What on earth is going on here? Carol couldn't contain her anger. Oh, you're early, Martha turned around. Her expression showed not the slightest hint of guilt. Why are you making my daughter wash dishes? Carol asked in a trembling voice. This child wouldn't listen, so this is punishment. She's working as a maid because she was bad, Martha said with a laugh, as if it were perfectly natural. Diane smirked and said, My children are good, so they're playing games. Carol was speechless. Looking at Emily's face, she saw her looking up with red, swollen eyes, as if pleading. Without a word, Carol stood at the sink, wiped Emily's wet hands with a towel, and gently lifted her up. Carol didn't say anything but left the kitchen holding Emily tightly. Seeing her child's tear-stained face, she felt a pain like her chest was being squeezed. Hey, where are you going? We were still talking, Martha called out. Yes, aren't you going to have some cake? Diane added. I bought it especially for today. But Carol didn't look back. Still holding Emily, she passed through the living room. Jason and Joshua briefly looked up from their game, saw their cousin crying, but immediately returned their focus to the screen. When she reached the entrance, Carol picked up Emily's backpack and opened the door. Carol, what's going on? George hurried out from the living room. Where are you going? Home, Carol answered briefly. I never intend to bring Emily here again. What are you saying? A little discipline. Carol interrupted her father. Discipline? What you were doing wasn't discipline. That was abuse. You're exaggerating. Martha appeared at the entrance. We just had her help out a little. Carol ignored her mother and put Emily in the car. After fastening the seatbelt and gripping the steering wheel, she finally took a deep breath. Once in the car, Emily finally began to cry audibly. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't do anything wrong, but she said between sobs. Of course, you didn't do anything wrong. It was my fault for taking you there, Carol said, looking at Emily's face in the rearview mirror. Do I never have to go back there again? No. Absolutely not, Carol answered with determination. When they got home, Carol gently seated Emily on the sofa and made her some warm cocoa. The two sat side by side, silent for a while. What happened? Carol finally asked quietly. Emily shrugged her small shoulders. Grandma said it's better to learn housework than to play the piano. And then, when I said I wanted to play the piano, Grandma got angry. Her voice was trembling. And so you were made to wash dishes. Emily nodded. Jason and Joshua were playing with a new game. Grandma said they're special because they're boys. Carol closed her eyes. It felt like her own childhood was repeating itself. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Carol made a decision. She would never take her daughter to that house again. And she herself would have as little contact as possible. 3 months passed. Carol kept contact with her parents to a minimum, and didn't let them see Emily. Phone calls came several times, but Carol dismissed them with a simple, "I'm busy." Messages came from Diane as well, but she didn't reply. Emily focused on her piano lessons and practiced hard for the next competition. Carol concentrated on her work at the pharmacy, trying not to think about her family. "Emily, what about the next competition?" Carol asked her daughter one evening. "I want to enter. But will Grandma and Grandpa come?" There was anxiety in Emily's eyes. "No, don't worry. We'll make it a day just for you." Carol smiled, but inside she felt a loneliness. Originally, the whole family should have been celebrating Emily's growth together. Then one day, Carol received an emergency call from her mother while at work. Her father had been hospitalized with a heart attack. Martha's voice on the phone was not in its usual confident tone, but trembling. "Carol, your father," Martha said tearfully. He suddenly clutched his chest. With mixed feelings, Carol immediately arranged for a substitute pharmacist and headed to the hospital. While riding the elevator, she wondered why she was so upset. It was a mixture of anger and concern. Entering the hospital room, Carol was confronted with the feeble figure of her father lying in bed. With an oxygen mask on and surrounded by monitors, George was far from his usual dignified self. Martha sat in a chair holding her husband's hand. "Carol, you came." Martha looked up with tearful eyes. "How is father's condition?" Carol asked calmly. "His life is out of danger, but thinking about the future." Martha's voice trailed off. According to the doctor's explanation, George's recovery would require long-term rehabilitation, and home care would be essential. It was clear that Martha couldn't handle it alone. "What about Diane?" Carol asked. "I called her, but she hasn't come yet," Martha answered, looking tired. Just then, Diane rushed into the hospital room. "Dad!" she cried, hurrying to the bedside. After a while, the three stood in the hospital corridor, discussing the future. The doctor had explained that weekly visiting nurses and daily family care would be necessary. "I'm sorry, but I have work and I need to take care of the children, so I can't help every day," Diane apologetically said. But Martha looked confused and lost for words. "Why don't you ask Carol? She's a pharmacist, so she knows about medications." Diane looked at Carol. Carol felt a sense of ironic destiny. Now, her parents and sister needed her help. Though she hadn't forgotten their treatment of Emily, considering her father's life was in danger, she couldn't simply refuse. "I'll think about it," she answered briefly. When she returned home, Emily was doing her homework after coming back from school. Carol quietly sat next to her daughter and briefly explained what had happened today. "Is Grandpa okay?" Emily asked worriedly. "His life isn't in danger, but it's going to be difficult for a while." After thinking for a moment, Emily showed an unexpected response. "Mom, Grandpa is having a hard time, right? Why don't you help them?" "But they hurt you." Carol looked into her daughter's face in surprise. "I've been thinking I want to be a nurse." "Isn't helping people the job?" Emily said with a serious expression. Carol's chest tightened at the words of her 10-year-old child. She felt both pride and remorse that her daughter had grown into such a compassionate child. She hugged Emily. "You're right, just as you say." The next day, Carol visited her parents' house and offered to help with her father's care several times a week. However, she did so on the condition that she wouldn't bring Emily. Martha showed gratitude, but said nothing about Carol's cold attitude. A few weeks after Carol began helping with the care, her father's condition gradually improved. George worked hard at rehabilitation, and slowly became able to do more things on his own. Carol used her expertise to manage medications and measure blood pressure. Martha tried to apologize to Carol several times, but Carol just went about her work. Carol, about that day. When Martha would bring it up, Carol would change the subject. "I've written down Dad's blood pressure records here, show it to the nurse when she comes." However, at one point, Father George took Carol's hand and began to speak in a weak voice. "Carol, I want to apologize for that day. We were wrong, Dad, just rest now." Carol tried to remove her hand. "No, let me say this. We treated your daughter terribly." "I'm ashamed." George's voice was small, but his words carried weight. There were tears in George's eyes. Carol didn't know how to respond, but she squeezed her father's hand back. George's condition gradually recovered. As he continued rehabilitation, and could little by little stand on his own feet, vitality returned to his expression. Before she knew it, Carol was visiting her parents' house 3 times a week to help with her father's recovery. One day, as Carol was measuring her father's blood pressure, George quietly said, "Carol, how is Emily doing these days?" For a moment, Carol was at a loss for words. Emily's topic had been taboo until now. She's fine. She's working hard at her piano practice. I see. George gazed out the window. I'd like to hear her play again. Carol studied her father's profile. His eyes seemed to reflect genuine regret. Thinking that, the hard lump in the depths of her chest felt like it softened a little. Diane continued to prioritize her own life and was hardly involved in the caregiving. When she occasionally showed up, she would typically make excuses like, I'm busy with the children's school events. In the past, Carol would have felt irritated by this, but now, strangely, her heart was calm. She had come to believe that her sister should live by her own values. Meanwhile, Emily won a piano competition and earned the right to participate in a regional competition. A small article was published in the local newspaper, and Carol proudly kept the clipping in her wallet. Mom, isn't it amazing? I can go to the regional competition. Emily jumped with joy on the day she heard about her victory. It really is amazing. Emily, I'm so proud of you. Carol hugged her daughter. It was a moment when all her hard work had paid off. Emily suddenly took on a serious expression and said, Can I tell Grandma and Grandpa too? Carol looked at her daughter in surprise. Really? Are you okay with that? Emily thought for a while, then quietly nodded. Yes. Grandpa is sick and having a hard time, right? So. I thought if he knew I'd won, it might cheer him up a little. Carol felt a warmth in her chest at her daughter's kindness. She was grateful that her child had grown up with a heart much purer than the anger and resentment she herself had harbored. The next day, Carol told her parents about Emily's competition victory. Martha showed a surprised expression and immediately said she wanted to attend the regional competition as well. But Carol was cautious. I can't let you see her until you apologize to Emily directly, she said firmly. Since then, she's been afraid to play the piano in front of people. She's finally overcome that and been able to enter competitions. Martha quietly nodded. I understand. I'm truly sorry. I want to meet her and apologize. Carol looked into Martha's eyes. In her mother's eyes was a humility she had never seen before. That weekend, Carol carefully prepared and confirmed with Emily if she was willing to meet her grandparents. Emily seemed a bit anxious but answered, It's okay. On Saturday afternoon, Martha and George visited Carol's house. George was walking with the support of a cane, but his color was good, showing signs of recovery. Emily sat at the piano with a tense expression. Emily, George quietly called out. He slowly entered the living room of his daughter's house and sat down on the sofa. Grandpa and Grandma want to apologize to you. We're sorry for what we did that day. You didn't do anything wrong, Martha said tearfully. She looked not like the dignified grandmother she usually was, but like a remorseful old woman. Emily remained silent, looking down, but eventually said in a small voice, Why did only I have to wash dishes? When I didn't do anything wrong? At that question, Martha and George exchanged glances. Then the truth came out. They had spoiled Diane's children, but that was because they had behavioral issues. They didn't listen and broke things, so Martha and George had raised them by trying to keep them happy. On the other hand, Emily was quiet and obedient, so they had naturally put her to work. We were wrong, George said in a heavy tone. And now, we're seeing the results. Jason and Joshua don't listen to anyone. They're causing problems at school, Martha added. We were repeating the same mistakes we've always made, just like we did with Carol. Carol was surprised. She hadn't thought her parents would admit it, that they themselves would voice the unfairness she had felt for years. Silence filled the room. Emily quietly stood up and sat at the piano. Then she began to play a beautiful piece. Chopin's Nocturne No. 2, a gentle and delicate melody spread throughout the room. Everyone in the room held their breath at the sound. When the performance ended, Martha wiped away tears and said, Wonderful, Emily. You really do have talent. Thank you, Grandma. Emily showed a smile for the first time. It was small, but a definite smile. You can come see the regional competition if Mom says it's okay, Emily said, looking slightly embarrassed. Carol was surprised by Emily's words but felt her daughter's growth. She nodded. We'll go, of course. Let's celebrate Emily's special day as a family. Thank you, Carol, George said, looking moved, for giving us this opportunity. Martha and George expressed their gratitude, and as they were leaving they said to Carol, You're a wonderful mother. You've raised Emily well. We need to learn from you. Hearing those words, tears welled up in Carol's eyes. They were the words of recognition she had sought for years. Yet, strangely, they didn't feel as important now. Something had changed within her. She had realized that rather than seeking her parents' approval, knowing her own worth and raising her daughter with care were most important. Thank you, Carol answered quietly. From now on, let's all move forward together. George placed his hand on Carol's shoulder. Emily taught us the importance of forgiveness. Carol nodded and looked at Emily. Her daughter was standing by the window, watching the sunset. The golden light illuminated her hair, making her look like an angel. Forgiving is liberating oneself, Carol whispered softly. That was the truth she had learned over a long time, having the courage to move forward rather than remaining trapped by past wounds. And it was her daughter who had taught her that. On a Sunday spring day, 1 year after Emily's regional competition, a table was set up in Carol's backyard for a family lunch. Laughter rang out in the warm sunshine. "Emily, have you decided on your next piece?" Martha asked as she poured lemonade. A gentle smile graced her face. "Yes, I've decided to play Debussy's Clair de Lune," Emily answered, looking a bit shy. Now 12 years old, she had improved her piano skills enough to receive a recommendation to the local music school. George was resting in a deck chair. Having fully recovered from his heart attack, he was now well enough to go golfing twice a week. "Grandpa will definitely come to your next recital." Carol came out to the garden with a smile, carrying a fruit platter. Her relationship with her parents had gradually been repaired, and now they had dinner together once a month. There were still occasional differences of opinion, but they remembered to respect each other. "Mom, are Jason and Joshua coming too?" Emily asked. "Yes, they'll be here soon," Carol answered. George and Martha had also changed their approach with Diane's children. Instead of spoiling them, they established appropriate boundaries and taught them responsibility. The boys resisted at first, but gradually they began to change too. The doorbell rang, and when Carol opened it, Diane was standing there. Behind her were the twin boys. They greeted her more politely than before. "Sorry we're a little late," Diane said. Her face showed signs of fatigue. She was struggling with parenting, having issues at work, and facing a divorce crisis. After lunch, while the adults were drinking coffee, the children were playing in the garden. Diane sat next to Carol and said in a small voice, "Carol, I need your advice." "What is it?" "I don't know what to do. The children won't listen to me and Mike is fed up with me." Tears welled up in Diane's eyes. Carol quietly took her sister's hand. "First, teach the children responsibility, and most importantly, respect them. Just like Emily." Diane said, holding back tears. "I want to apologize for not doing anything for Emily that day. I was just trying to protect my own children. What matters isn't the past, but the future. You can change too." At Carol's words, Diane felt hope for the first time in a long while. After that, Diane began receiving parenting counseling and making efforts to repair her relationship with her children. The sound of a piano came from the living room. Emily had begun to play. The entire family listened quietly. The beautiful melody Emily played was no longer a symbol of past pain, but a symbol of new bonds and reconciliation. When the performance ended, Emily said to everyone, "In the future, I want to be a piano teacher. I want to teach children the wonder of music." Carol felt proud seeing her daughter's growth. She had learned that people can change by acknowledging past mistakes, sincerely apologizing, and showing it through actions. And above all, the power of forgiveness.